I've had two experiences in my lifetime so far. I'm currently in my 30s. The most recent was about 2 years ago. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in California. A couple of weeks leading up to the event, I kept having a feeling I was being watched as I laid in bed before falling asleep. Then one night, I woke up just past 3 a.m. and had the feeling I was being watched again. I lifted my head off the pillow to look towards my door and immediately felt a hand smack the side of my head, pushing it back into the pillow. Completely freaked out, I jumped out of bed and turned on every light. I ran around my whole apartment and found nothing. I was alone. However, my first experience happened when I was around 12 years old. My family and I, mom, dad, and sister, had just moved into a new house in Colorado. The weird stuff started happening on the first night in the new house. I had a bunk bed at the time. The top bunk was the bed, and the bottom was a desk. On the first night, shortly after I got into bed, I felt the whole bed start shaking. It felt as if someone was grabbing one of the bedposts and violently shaking the bed with their hands. It lasted about 5 or so minutes. This happened every single night that I slept in my bed in that house. I tried explaining to my parents what was happening, but they brushed it off like I was crazy and never believed me. A few months after moving into the house, my alarm clock would start going off at random times in the middle of the night, always at a different time. My dad was getting furious at me for waking him up, but at that point in my life, I never used the alarm feature on that clock. Not once had I ever physically turned on the alarm. As much as I pleaded with my parents, they never believed me. I should also add that my sister had an identical bed in her own separate room and never experienced her bed shaking or anything else weird. We only lived in that house for about 1.5 years, and immediately after moving, all those experiences stopped. That bed never shook again. The alarm never went off again. Years later, my dad admitted that he experienced some weird things in the house as well. He never brought it up for fear of embarrassment. On one particular night, he heard a loud noise in the hallway in front of my room. Being a work night, he was pretty upset, thinking I was messing around late at night and had woken him. He got out of bed and peeked his head out the door. He swears he saw a shadowy figure standing in front of my door. It completely freaked him out, and he immediately jumped back into bed. This made me question why he never believed me when I was telling him all the stuff going on in my room at the time. I think he just refused to believe anything like that could ever be real or possible. I went back to Colorado for a work trip a couple of years ago and wanted to drive by the old neighborhood to check it out. It had been years since I last saw the house. I got in the rental car, and as soon as I was on the highway, I had this terrible feeling telling me not to go. Right then, a coworker called and asked if I wanted to go out and get ice cream. I got off at the first exit I came to and turned around. We got ice cream. I never went to the neighborhood. That was the first and last time that coworker had ever wanted to do anything outside of the hotel. He only ever wanted to hang out in his room and go to bed early. Maybe a coincidence? I don't know. But it really makes me feel like something was seriously wrong with that house. Those are my experiences with the weird or paranormal. I have only told a couple of people outside of my family, unsure of how they would react or treat me. I figured this could be a safe place to finally express what I've dealt with. I work in a county jail comprised of 2 buildings, one referred to as the new jail and the other as the old jail. Numerous experiences have been reported by me and my coworkers. One of my personal experiences that actually made my heart rate go up occurred when I was in the bathroom in the chapel located in the old jail. The chapel is among the top 5 most haunted places in the old jail, and the bathroom is in the top 3. I was in the bathroom doing my business, as you can imagine. The chapel is secure, and you need big, loud, old keys to get in. If someone turns the key in the lock, you can hear it 3 rooms over, so I knew for a fact that no one but me was in there. As I was getting ready to leave the bathroom, I heard what I believed to be someone either running their hands all over the wooden door, or someone pressing their face to the crack of the door and breathing heavily. I nearly called for help over my radio. I didn't know what to do. Others have seen or felt sick in an old housing unit on the ground floor, and some have seen faces in the holding cells in the old infirmary, which is now closed. One of my favorite stories is from when the suicide watch cells were still in use in the old infirmary. There were multiple reports of inmates trying to beat the doors down because they saw shadow men in the cells with them, even when they were supposed to be alone. Other than that, I've heard knocking in the middle of the night on windows where there was no one there, plastic cups falling on the ground with no one present, showers turning on by themselves, and inmates being loud and carrying on when no one was housed on that floor. I could go on and on. Our home has 2 spirits, a little boy around 10 to 11 years old, and an old man. My son first became aware of the old man a few months after we moved in, when he was playing on his backyard swing with a friend. They were sitting together on the big saucer swing when his friend got up, leaving my son seated and playing with his toy. He felt the weight of someone sitting down on the swing again, and thinking it was his friend, began talking to him. From across the yard, his friend asked who he was talking to. My son looked up, saw his friend standing on the other side of the yard, and realized someone was still sitting next to him. Too afraid to look over completely, he later told me that the presence felt like an older man about his grandfather's age. In hindsight, after the initial shock, he said the man felt friendly. I believe the old man looks out for us. I've had things go missing only for them to turn up in odd but helpful places, as if someone moved them to help us later. For example, a necklace I wore for years broke the first night we moved in. Upset because it was sentimental, I set it on the living room table. The next day, it was gone. I thought my husband had moved it, but he swore he hadn't touched it, last seeing it on the table. My son had no idea it was missing until I told him. I found the necklace a year later in my bedside table drawer, buried under papers and junk. Tonight I lit a candle and set my lighter on the dresser. When I went to grab it a few minutes later, it wasn't there. I spotted it on the suite bathroom windowsill, somewhere I hadn't gone in those few minutes. As I turned to grab it, a spider walked across my bedroom carpet between me and the bathroom. But not just any spider, a brown recluse, heading straight for my bed. If I hadn't been looking for the lighter, I wouldn't have seen it. We've had other things disappear and reappear in this manner many times, and I believe it's the old man trying to help us out. Now, onto the little boy. The first time my son saw the little boy's spirit that resides in our house was when he was 7 years old, shortly after we moved into our 30-year-old home. He woke up one morning with the feeling that someone was in his room and looked over to the corner by the door to see a little boy standing there, watching him silently. I asked him to draw the boy he saw, and as he showed me the drawing, he described the boy as being a little older than him. As previously mentioned, we guessed around 10 to 11 years old, with longer dark hair and empty eyes. I asked what empty meant, and he said the boy didn't have eyes like us, just dark holes where his eyes should be. His clothes were old-looking with a kind of button-down shirt like Dad wears and a reddish jacket thingy. He didn't know quite how to explain that one, but my best guess is some kind of vest and blue jeans. I asked if he was afraid of the boy, but he said that the boy didn't scare him. He didn't speak or make any noise as he stood there, but my son said he felt like the boy was asking him to come play. He admitted to being too shocked to get up from his bed, and as he watched, the boy vanished where he stood. The second time the boy made his presence known to my son, he was heard rather than seen. One night, several months after the first encounter, I was alerted by my son calling from his room to please make him stop whistling. We hadn't spoken much about the boy around my son, as we didn't want him to become afraid. I went into his room to assure him that I hadn't heard anything, only to be interrupted by a 2-note, high whistling noise that lasted several seconds and sounded very much like a human whistling. It was so realistic that I asked my husband if it was coming from his video game in the next room. I stayed for a few minutes, hearing it again, but with a discernible change to the pitch and length of each note. I asked aloud, for my son's comfort, that the whistling please stop so my son could get some sleep. After a few more minutes, we didn't hear anything else, and my son informed me that he didn't feel the boy anymore. We have had many other occurrences in the house that we attribute to the boy. Our cat will often become upset out of nowhere and hide, refusing to come out. This kind of behavior, while normal for some cats, is extremely out of the ordinary for ours, who will readily climb into the laps of anyone visiting our home, whether he's met them before or not. Toys and televisions have turned on by themselves throughout the house. Items have been knocked off shelves. Noises have been heard that sound like our son moving around the house even when he's confirmed to be in bed fast asleep, and items will often go missing from their places and turn up in random spots. Unlike the old man in my previous post, the boy seems to move our belongings for his own entertainment rather than any helpful purpose. While we can't pinpoint much about the boy's history, the old clothing my son described leads me to believe he may be an older spirit from before the home was built in the early 1990s. Our small town in the south was built on and around farmland, and the land our home stands on now had likely once been part of the fields and woods for nearby farms. Some of these historic homes still stand, and as our area of town is where most of the farming families lived in the earlier days, there's no way to know how long this boy's spirit may have been here. Attached to this post is the drawing my son made after the first encounter. During my childhood, my mother and I used to ride our bicycles past the old cemetery near where we lived in the woods. One day, when we were riding past it, I noticed a little boy sitting on a gravestone. His figure was translucent, but his grin was bright and kind. With an unearthly sparkle in his eyes, he waved to me. I waved back, grinning and experiencing an unexplainable feeling of warmth. Curious, my mother asked, "Who are you waving at?" "The boy," I replied, pointing towards the cemetery where the child had been sitting just moments before. "What boy?" My mother's voice trembled as she spoke, her gaze flickering towards the empty space where the boy had vanished without a trace. "The little boy sitting on the gravestone," I insisted, confusion gnawing at my insides as I searched for any sign of the mysterious child. But the cemetery remained silent, the only sound being the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. "There's no one there," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. We both shrugged it off, turned around, and rode back home. That was the only time I saw the little boy, but his memory still remains vivid in my mind to this day.